Close your eyes. You are a country in the modern world. You need oil to move trucks, fly planes, run factories, ship food, power militaries, and keep the lights of civilization from flickering out. But before you can buy that oil, you need something else first. Not a tanker, not a refinery, not even an oil field. You need US dollars. That is the strange genius of the petrodollar system. America did not need to own every barrel of oil on Earth. It only needed the world's most important commodity to be priced, traded, financed, and recycled through its currency. And once that happened, the dollar stopped being just money. It became global infrastructure. To explain it like you are 5, imagine every kid in the world needs water from the same giant water fountain. But the fountain only accepts one kind of token, the American token. So even if you live far away, even if you do not like America, even if you trade mostly with other kids, you still need American tokens because everybody needs water. Now imagine the kids who own the fountain receive piles of tokens and then lend those tokens back to America. That is the basic idea. Oil created constant demand for dollars, and oil exporters sent many of those dollars back into American financial markets. But the story did not begin with oil, it began with gold. After World War II, the Bretton Woods system made the US dollar the center of the global monetary order. Other currencies were linked to the dollar, and the dollar was convertible into gold at $35 an ounce for foreign governments and central banks. That made the dollar feel trustworthy, because it was not just paper, it was a paper claim on gold. But by the late 1960s, America was spending heavily on Vietnam, Cold War commitments, and domestic programs, while more dollars existed outside the United States than America could comfortably back with gold. The Federal Reserve History Project says confidence in the U.S. ability to meet gold obligations was under threat before Nixon acted in 1971. Then came August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon went on television and announced that the United States would suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold. The word temporarily did a lot of work there because the old gold convertibility never really came back. In simple terms, Nixon closed the gold window. Before that moment, foreign governments could say, "Here are dollars, please give us gold." After that moment, America said no more gold. Trust the dollar because it is the dollar. That was a terrifying experiment. The world's reserve currency had lost its metal anchor, so America needed a new anchor, and the answer would come from the ground, not the vault. Then the oil shock arrived like a slap. In October 1973, during the Arab-Israeli War, Arab oil producers imposed an embargo on the United States after Washington supported Israel. The Federal Reserve History Project says OPEC instituted the embargo on October 19, 1973, and oil prices nearly quadrupled from $2.90s per barrel before the embargo to $11.65s per barrel in January 1974. The U.S. State Department's History Office also describes oil prices first doubling and then quadrupling, creating major pressure on consumers and economies. Gas lines stretched across America. Suddenly oil was not just a commodity, it was a weapon. This is the moment people miss. America had two crises at once. First, the dollar was no longer backed by gold. Second, the world's most important energy source could be used against America and its allies. If the dollar was going to remain king, it needed a reason for the world to keep holding it. Not a speech, not a promise, a necessity. Oil was perfect because every industrial country needed it. Japan needed oil. Germany needed oil. France needed oil. South Korea needed oil. Even countries that disliked America needed oil. So if oil was mostly priced in dollars, the world would still need dollars even without gold. Now enter Saudi Arabia. This part is often described online as one secret desert handshake that instantly created the petrodollar. The real history is messier. It was not one magic document that forced every barrel on Earth to use dollars forever. It was a security, finance, and energy relationship that hardened into a system. Reuters has described the term petrodollar as emerging in the mid-1970s when the United States and Saudi Arabia agreed that global oil sales would be denominated in dollars, creating demand for the greenback and cementing U.S. strategic and economic power. In exchange, Washington deepened security ties, arms sales, and strategic protection for the Saudi kingdom. The deal was beautiful in the coldest possible way. Saudi Arabia had oil, but it also had enemies, insecurity, and a giant target on its back. America had military power, but it needed the dollar to stay central after gold. So the bargain was simple. Oil keeps flowing. Oil is priced in dollars. Saudi Arabia earns mountains of dollars, and many of those dollars return to U.S. assets. America protects the kingdom and helps arm it. Saudi Arabia supports the dollar-based oil order. One side gets security, the other gets monetary power. Both sides get influence. Everyone else gets a very clear message. If you want oil, bring dollars. This is where petrodollar recycling begins. Imagine Saudi Arabia sells oil to Japan and receives dollars. But Saudi Arabia cannot spend all those dollars inside its own domestic economy. There are only so many roads, palaces, ports, weapons, and projects it can buy at once. So the extra dollars need a home. Where do they go? Into U.S. Treasury bonds, American banks, Wall Street assets, and dollar-based investments. That is recycling. Dollars leave America to buy oil. Oil exporters collect them. Then those dollars flow back into American financial markets. The loop helps finance U.S. deficits and supports demand for U.S. debt. The genius of the loop is that America benefits even when it is not selling the oil. If Germany buys oil from Saudi Arabia in dollars, the US still benefits because the transaction reinforces dollar demand. If Japan keeps dollar reserves to pay for energy imports, the US benefits. If Gulf exporters invest surplus dollars in treasuries, the US benefits. That is the trick. The United States sits at the center of the payment system, debt market, banking network, and reserve structure. Oil was the hook, finance was the machine, military power was the fence around the machine. By the 1980s, this system had helped turn the dollar into something larger than a national currency. It became the currency of reserves, commodities, trade finance, debt, and banking. The Federal Reserve's 2025 edition on the international role of the US dollar says the dollar remains dominant internationally, and that over $1 trillion in dollar banknotes were held by foreigners in the first quarter of 2025, roughly half of total dollar banknotes outstanding. That means even physical dollars are not just American money. They are global emergency money, savings money, black market money, and crisis money. Now ask why this matters. A normal country that spends more than it earns eventually gets punished. Its currency weakens, its borrowing costs rise, its imports become expensive. But the United States is not a normal borrower because the world needs dollars. Countries need dollars for reserves. Banks need dollars for funding. Companies need dollars for invoices. Commodity traders need dollars for oil and many other raw materials. Investors need dollars because treasuries are deep, liquid, and accepted everywhere. Congress's research service says about half of international trade is invoiced in dollars and about half of international loans and global debt securities are denominated in dollars. This is the exorbitant privilege. The phrase sounds elegant, but the idea is brutal. America can borrow in its own currency more easily than other countries. It can run large deficits for longer. It can sell treasury debt to the same world that depends on dollar liquidity. It can import real goods and pay with claims on future dollars. Of course, there are limits. America cannot print without consequence forever. Inflation, debt, confidence, and politics still matter. But compared with other nations, the US gets a softer landing because the dollar is the operating system of global finance. The dollar is also everywhere in foreign exchange. According to the Bank for International Settlements 2022 Triennial Central Bank Survey, foreign exchange trading averaged $7.5 trillion per day in April 2022, and the US dollar was on one side of 88% of all FX trades. That number is insane. It means the dollar is not simply one currency among many. It is the bridge currency. If two countries trade currencies, often the easiest route is through the dollar. Like an airport hub, even flights that do not begin or end in America may still pass through the American financial runway. And once your money becomes infrastructure, sanctions become a superpower. If a country is deeply connected to the dollar system, then being cut off from that system is not like losing one payment option. It is like losing oxygen. Banks cannot settle normally. Companies cannot borrow easily. Imports become harder. Reserves become less safe. Payments get blocked. Insurance, shipping, and correspondent banking all become fragile. That is why dollar power is not only economic, it is geopolitical. America can pressure enemies without firing a shot because so much of the world's financial plumbing runs through systems the US can influence. Russia showed the world how powerful and frightening that weapon could be. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Western countries froze large parts of Russia's foreign reserves and cut major Russian banks from international payment channels. Reuters reported in 2026 that Russia's central bank estimated about $300 billion of its sovereign funds had been frozen by Western countries. From Washington's view, this was punishment for invasion. From the view of other governments, it was a warning label on the dollar system. Reserves are safe until geopolitics says they are not. That moment scared more than Russia. China saw it. Saudi Arabia saw it. India saw it. Brazil saw it. Every central bank saw it. If reserves can be frozen, then diversification is no longer just boring portfolio management. It becomes national defense. So countries started asking uncomfortable questions. How much should we keep in dollars? How much should we keep in gold? Can we settle more trade in local currencies? Can we build payment systems outside Western control? Can we reduce the risk of being kicked off the financial internet? This is how de-dollarization begins. Not with one rival king, but with many countries building small escape doors. The numbers show pressure but not collapse. IMF coffer data shows the US dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves was 57.13% in the first quarter of 2026, up from 56.42% in late 2025, but still far below the roughly 70% levels seen in earlier decades. That is the story in one sentence. The dollar is still king, but the throne is not as lonely as it used to be. The euro, yen, pound, gold, and smaller reserve currencies all play roles. The Chinese yuan remains much smaller as a reserve currency, but even a small increase matters if the long-term direction is diversification. Gold is the emotional opposite of the dollar. A treasury bond is someone else's promise. Gold is nobody's liability. That is why central banks buy gold when trust becomes complicated. The World Gold Council reported that central banks continued heavy buying in 2024, part of a multi-year wave of official sector demand. Reuters also described central banks as major players in recent gold demand. The message is not that gold will replace the dollar tomorrow. Gold cannot invoice global trade like the dollar. It cannot run the world's banking system, but it can sit in a vault and quietly say, "No foreign government can freeze me with a keyboard." Saudi Arabia itself has also sent signals that the old system is no longer untouchable. Bloomberg reported in 2023 that Saudi Arabia's finance minister said the kingdom was open to discussions about trade in currencies other than the US dollar. That does not mean Saudi Arabia instantly killed the petrodollar. It did not. Oil trade remains heavily dollar-based. The Saudi riyal is still pegged to the dollar. Gulf financial systems remain deeply connected to US rates and markets, but symbolically it mattered. The country that helped build the petrodollar order was publicly saying, "We are willing to talk about other currencies." China is the most important challenger, but not because the yuan is ready to replace the dollar tomorrow. It is not. China has capital controls, less open financial markets, and a legal political system many investors do not trust the same way they trust US treasuries. But China is the world's largest oil importer, a giant trading power, and a country actively trying to expand yuan settlement. If China buys oil from Russia or the Gulf in yuan, even at the margin, it chips away at the psychological monopoly. Again, this is not one dramatic explosion. It is erosion. Grain by grain, the beach changes shape. Oil itself may become a weaker anchor over time. The petrodollar system was strongest when oil was the unavoidable lifeblood of industrial civilization. Oil is still enormous, and it is not disappearing tomorrow. Planes, ships, trucks, chemicals, plastics, militaries, and many industries still depend on it. But electric vehicles, batteries, renewables, energy efficiency, and new industrial systems are slowly changing the map. If the world becomes less oil-dependent, then the currency system tied to oil becomes less emotionally powerful. The dollar will still have many advantages, but oil will not be the same unbeatable weapon forever. Still, anyone screaming, "The dollar is dead," is probably selling something. The dollar has weaknesses, but every rival has bigger ones. The euro has political fragmentation. The yuan has capital controls and trust issues. Gold has no yield and cannot handle global payments. Bitcoin and crypto are volatile and too small for sovereign trade at scale. Local currency trade works in pieces, but global companies still want a currency everyone accepts. That is why the dollar remains king. A king can age. A king can become unpopular. A king can be challenged. But replacing a king who also owns the roads, banks, courts, and payment rails is not easy. The petrodollar also survives because it is convenient. Oil exporters like dollars because dollars buy everything. Importers like dollars because dollar markets are liquid. Banks like dollars because everyone else uses dollars. Traders like dollars because hedging tools are deep. Governments like dollars because treasuries are easy to buy and sell. This is the network effect. The more people use a currency, the more useful it becomes. The more useful it becomes, the more people use it. Breaking that loop requires not just anger, but a better system. And so far the world has anger, but not a full replacement. This is why oil made the US dollar king of the world, not because oil alone created dollar dominance. Bretton Woods, the size of the US economy, military power, Wall Street, treasury markets, law, technology, and trust all mattered. But oil gave the post-gold dollar a new reason to be needed. After Nixon cut the gold link, the dollar could have drifted into a weaker role. Instead, the oil system helped create permanent global demand. Every country needed energy. Energy needed dollars. Oil exporters recycled dollars. US debt markets grew stronger. American power became cheaper to finance. The loop fed itself. The dark joke is that the dollar stopped being backed by gold and became backed by something messier. Oil, debt, military power, financial depth, and everybody else's habit. That is not as clean as gold. But in some ways it was more powerful. Gold sits still. Oil moves economies. Debt finances states. Military power protects routes. Habits lock in behavior. Together, they built a system where America could sit in the middle of the world economy and charge an invisible fee through currency dominance. People did not have to love the dollar. They only had to need it. So if a 5-year-old asks, how did oil make the dollar king? The answer is simple. The world needed oil. Oil was sold mostly in dollars, so the world needed dollars. Oil countries earned dollars. They put many dollars back into America. America borrowed more easily. America used that power to protect the system. Then banks, traders, governments, and companies built their habits around the dollar. After 50 years, the dollar was not just the money used to buy oil. It was the money used to run the world. And now, for the first time in a long time, that machine is being questioned. Russia learned reserves can be frozen. China wants more control. Saudi Arabia is open to more options. Central banks are buying gold. The IMF data shows the dollar's reserve share is lower than its old peak. But the system has not collapsed. It is bending, not breaking. The petrodollar is no longer an untouchable myth, but it is still a working machine. And the biggest lesson is this: empires do not always rule by owning everything. Sometimes they rule by making sure that when the world wants the thing it cannot live without, it must first ask for your money.